If you're like me, which I doubt, your first introduction to the concept of codependency arrived in the majestic form of a now-deleted 2008 Chris Crocker video on YouTube.
We all know someone who doesn't know how to love themselves. They constantly have to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. It's called codependency. These people try to tell themselves, no, I just don't like to be alone. No, bitch, you're codependent. And what someone really needs to do is look at you and go, and make you wake up and love yourself.
So as a 10-year-old child, I understood codependency as being unable to be alone, needing to be in a romantic relationship. But that's only the tip of the codependent iceberg. My knowledge was so limited, in fact, that I recently looked up the definition to make sure I knew what I was talking about. Guess I'm codependent. Before you go comparing yourself to the first search result on Google, let me just start by saying codependency doesn't have any single scientific or social definition. In fact, it's never even been proven to exist as an official disorder, just an observable set of behaviors. With that said, let's take a look at the various definitions and criteria for codependency. According to McGrath and Oakley, codependency is an inability to tolerate a perceived negative effect in others that leads to a dysfunctional empathic response. There's also an element of low self-worth and seeking approval from others. This definition is actually a lot broader than the original connotation, which associated codependency with enabling behavior toward drug or alcohol-addicted individuals in particular. While codependency is often found in relationships with drug-addicted, mentally ill, or chronically ill people, these characteristics aren't necessary for codependency to exist, and it's possible for both parties to enable each other's dysfunctions to meet their own psychological needs. So what does codependent behavior look like? That depends on who you ask, and let me tell you, the 80s were great for codependency self-help literature. For example, the self-help book Facing Codependence puts forward 5 symptoms. The enabler struggles with low self-esteem, functional boundaries, owning their own reality, and identifying and satisfying their own needs, as well as expressing reality in extremes. Meanwhile, self-help author Melody Beattie had already released a much more extensive list of codependent characteristics in her book Codependent No More, which include caretaking, low self-worth, repression of feelings, denial, weak personal boundaries, among many others. However, she points out that these behaviors are normal to a point and only become dysfunctional once the person allows themselves to be defined by another individual. This is why when you search for codependency symptoms, you see a ton of relatable characteristics. In reality, neither study provided any empirical evidence, so don't automatically assume you're horribly afflicted with some disorder. Codependency also looks different based on culture. For example, some countries have more passive and polite cultures, which could be misconstrued as repressing feelings by someone who grew up in a more direct or blunt culture. So now that we know how inconsistent the definition is, let's dive deeper into the behaviors typically found in codependent relationships. In these relationships, there is typically an enabling partner and an enabled partner. The enabler often has a drive to feel needed and a fear of rejection and abandonment, and so supports their partner to mitigate these fears. In some cases, enablers may even compare themselves to their dysfunctional partners in order to feel better about themselves. Enablers are typically so concerned with how someone else feels to the point of losing regard or awareness for their own emotions. They may be manipulative or try to control the relationship and avoid uncertainty. Fear of rejection or of hurting the other person's feelings inhibits honest and open communication. They may be excessively compliant and self-sacrificing, further losing touch with their own needs. The enabled, because they feel accepted with their dysfunction, may not mature or progress as an individual. This unhealthy relationship negatively affects both partners and can make one or both feel trapped. Daniel Harkness at Boise State University lists some of the most commonly reported symptoms of codependency as intense and unstable interpersonal relationships, inability to tolerate being alone, chronic feelings of boredom and emptiness, subordinating one's own needs to those of the person with whom one is involved, overwhelming desire for acceptance and affection, external referencing, dishonesty and denial, and low self-worth. The codependent relationship doesn't have to be romantic. Codependency can also occur between a parent and child, friends, or even coworkers. When I think of a parent who is codependent toward their child, I think of Eric Cartman's mom. Now, she gets a little better in later episodes, but in the series, Leanne Cartman enables a number of her son's dysfunctional behaviors, from excessive eating and materialism to abusive language and behavior. Empathy has been very important in the progress of humanity. From an evolutionary perspective, codependent behaviors may be explained by social pressure to keep the bigger group sailing smoothly. Now, I mentioned codependency isn't an actual disorder, but there is a very similar disorder in the DSM-5 called dependent personality disorder. The diagnostic criteria consists of an excessive and pervasive need to be taken care of, leading to fears of separation and clingy, submissive behavior, being unrealistically occupied with fears of having to care for themselves. This is different from someone who literally cannot care for themselves due to sickness, disability, or age, and fears must be excessive and unrealistic. Ending a codependent relationship is complicated for multiple reasons, including the initial stress that naturally accompanies a relationship's ending. Typically, the stronger the relationship, the more difficult the bond of codependency is to break. So how can you minimize codependent behavior in yourself and in your relationships? Exploring issues related to relationships in your childhood might be a good place to start, especially analyzing how those relationships relate to any current destructive behavior patterns. Individual and group therapy is also highly recommended for rediscovering yourself and recognizing destructive behavior in order to feel your own emotions and desires again. Loved ones of individuals who suffer from drug addiction should educate themselves on the cycle of addiction. Libraries and mental health and alcohol abuse treatment centers offer educational materials and programs to the public. To avoid codependent behavior, the enabling must end. Codependent individuals must learn to embrace their own wants and needs and learn to say no, to be loving but tough, and to be self-reliant. Through recovery, codependent individuals can find peace, love, and freedom from within themselves.